Hey, you want to see something cool? It's this shirt. It comes from Into the AM, fine purveyors of high-quality graphic tees and elevated menswear with whom I have a partnership. So when you shop at Into the AM and you use the link in the description, or if you use code Grouchy when you check out, you're not only going to save 10% off your order, you're also going to help support this channel, and everybody likes you for that. Don't you want everyone to like you? IntoTheAM.com/Grouchy, or use code Grouchy when you check out, or just use the link in the description. Now let's get into it. The Grouchy Nerd. Alright, quiet down, knuckleheads. It's time to take another look at a new hero for Fantasy Flight Games Marvel Champions. This time we're looking at Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner was born to parents Raven Darkholme and Irene Adler. Raven Darkholme would go on to be known as the shape-shifting mutant Mystique. Irene would go on to be known as the precognizant mutant Destiny. And if the name Irene Adler sounds familiar to you at all, that's Sherlock Holmes' girlfriend, because in the Marvel comic books, Sherlock Holmes was not only a real person, but was in fact Mystique. Shape-shifted, pretending to be a man to solve crimes. That has nothing to do with Nightcrawler, but I learned it, and I needed other people to know it. Many years later, Mystique, who was married to Baron Christian Wagner, a German nobleman, had been having a sanctioned affair with Azazel, a mutant who's also sort of Marvel Satan. Well, sanctioned by Irene, not by the Baron. He didn't know anything about it. The affair with Azazel ended, but soon after, Irene wanted a baby, so Mystique did the obvious thing and shapeshifted into Azazel to impregnate Irene. But Wagner found out and attacked them, so Mystique killed him and then shifted to look like him so none of the staff would know. Kurt was born blue like Mystique and furry and looking like a demon like Azazel, complete with tail. And he probably had Irene's nose or something. Wagner's staff figured out something was amiss, formed a mob with the locals, and ran them out of town. Mystique then lost Kurt, who ended up in the care of a Romani tribe who took care of him. He and his adopted mother were taken in by a circus. Kurt was tossed in a cage and forced to work as a sideshow freak, until the ringmaster realized that Kurt's preternatural agility and a tail so dexterous as to basically be a third hand would make him a star acrobat. However, he was little more than a prisoner, kept sedated at all times so he didn't try to run away, forced to sleep in a cage, and subjected to religious abuse because of his demonic appearance. One night, he managed an escape at the sacrifice of his adopted mother, but was quickly cornered by the circus baddies who were going to execute him on the spot when a secondary mutation triggered. Kurt seemingly disappeared in a puff of purple smoke that had a strong sulfur smell to it, but had in fact teleported several yards away. He found shelter in a church with a Father Wagner, which I'm not sure if that guy is supposed to be the Baron's brother, or if Wagner is just like Smith over there. Kurt lived there for a time, helping the priest with maintenance around the church and learning the softer side of Catholicism. And we're just gonna move right on past that. Until one night, the circus folk caught up with him. The circus folk set fire to the church and were getting ready to kill the Wagners, but Charles Xavier showed up to cool things off and offered Kurt a ride to America and a spot with the X-Men. Kurt helped rescue the original X-Men from Krakoa, and when most of the first class bounced, Kurt, picking the code name Nightcrawler, joined Storm, Colossus, Banshee, Sunfire, Thunderbird, and Wolverine as the new X-Men lineup. Since then, he's taken over as leader of the X-Men when Storm temporarily lost her powers, followed Lockheed through a vortex in the well at the center of time and had some wacky adventures there, gave up the leadership of the X-Men so he didn't have to deal with all this nonsense, got punched so hard by Nimrod that he lost his teleportation powers, he got them back but they kind of hurt for a while, formed a British-based X-team called Excalibur with Kitty Pryde, Captain Britain, Megan, a mutant werewolf, and Rachel Summers, and he developed a tertiary mutation, blending into shadows. He's become a priest, given up the priesthood, died sacrificing himself to save Hope Summers, went to actual heaven, was brought back, discovered that each time he teleports he briefly passes through a hell dimension, hence the smell, and recently has been in a modified Spider-Man suit going by the name Spider-Man! But now he's just back to being Nightcrawler. Let's take a look. On his hero side is Nightcrawler, who does 2 thwart, 1 attack, and 3 defend. He gets a hand size of 5 and 9 hit points, the X-Men trait, and rapid teleportation. As an action, spend 1 resource of any type to return a copy of BAMF from your discard pile to your hand. So obviously we're going to take a look at BAMF here in a little bit, but being able to recur a character-specific card is always very, very strong, and it's also always very, very fun to see 3 defense. I love that. On his alter ego side is Kurt Wagner, who gets 3 recover. His hand size goes up to 6. His trait becomes a mutant, and once per round, you can search your deck for a copy of BAMF and add it to your hand. So in alter ego, you can dig it out of your deck for free. In hero, you can pay a resource to get it back out of your discard pile. Kinda feels like maybe BAMF is gonna be a pretty important card. A recovery of 3 with 9 hit points feels a little bit rough, though. That's what regular people get. He's a little fuzzy demon man. Up first in his kit is Day Tripper, as played by Amanda Sefton. She costs 2 to get out, has 2 hit points, and does 2s in each of her stats. She has the Mystic trait, and after she enters play, search your deck and discard pile for a copy of BAMF and attach it to an enemy. Then deal 1 damage to each enemy with a copy of BAMF attached. Well, there's a whole lot to like here. A 2-cost ally with 2s in her stats means she's going to be able to pull you out of some pretty rough spots threat-wise if you need her to, being able to take 4 threat off of the main scheme if you're getting buried somewhere else. That's great. Plus getting another BAMF into play and doing that 1 point of damage means she's going to be really good for clearing tough statuses. Next up is 1 copy of Kurt's Chapel, a 1-cost location support. It gives Kurt +1 to his recover, and when you make a basic recover, exhaust the chapel to let 1 identity draw 1 card. Having to flip down to alter ego to do a basic recover never feels good. It's a momentum killer. You know you're going to be dealing with a ton of threat that's going to come your way if you weren't able to get a confuse down on the villain first. So making that basic recover count for more, getting 4 recover instead of 3 recover, and getting to draw a card, that's huge. 1 copy of Kurt's Cutlasses are next, which is just 1 upgrade but counts as 2 restricted keywords. It costs 2, has the weapon trait, and gives Nightcrawler +1 to his attack, +1 to his defend, and the retaliate keyword. So it's 1 2-cost card that boosts your attack, it boosts your defense, it gets your defense up to 4, and it gives you retaliate. Mulligan hard for this card. Maybe even bring along superpower training to help you find this card. This card is amazing. Your basic defense is up to a 4. It's not going to matter that you only have 9 hit points. You're defending for 4. And, for some reason, a Tombstone reference on that flavor text. Why? I've got 2 guns, 1 for each of you. It's Drunk Doc Holiday. What does that have to do with a German acrobat? Prehensile Tail is a 1-cost upgrade. This one has the superpower trait and gives you another restricted slot. And you can exhaust Prehensile Tail to generate a wild resource to help pay for an event. Love having a resource generator. I love having a wild resource generator. It is a little too bad that it's limited to events. That means you can't use this to fuel your hero ability that lets you spend a resource of any type to bring BAMF back out of your discard pile. Can't do that. But it is still really nice. But of greater concern, you gotta find your tail. You gotta find your tail and then pay to put it into play. That means some games you're not gonna have your tail. And the long-awaited BAMF is next. It's a 0-cost upgrade that we get 3 copies of. Attach it to an enemy, limit 1 per enemy. Then, as a defense hero interrupt, when the attached enemy attacks, you can discard this card to make Nightcrawler the defender of the attack without having to exhaust him. So you get to defend that attack at your 3 or probably 4 later in the game without having to exhaust. And you can do that maybe 3 times if you have 3 BAMFs out on 3 different enemies. That's amazing. And defending without exhausting is almost like readying. And readying is good. But as you might suspect, that is not all that these cards are going to do. 2 copies of Port and Punch is next. It's a 2-cost superpower attack event. As a hero action, deal 3 damage to an enemy. Then deal 3 damage to each enemy with a BAMF attached. It's unlikely that you're going to be doing 12 damage with this, but it's certainly possible if you have 3 copies of BAMF on 3 different enemies and you play this and you do 3 and then you do 3, 3, 3, 3. That's 12 damage. Even if you're only doing 6 or 9, that's still really good. If you're only doing 3, it's not very good. Don't play this if there's not a BAMF out. That's stupid. Don't do that. Next is just 1 copy of Teleport Drop, another 2-cost superpower attack. As a hero action, discard a copy of BAMF from an enemy to deal 8 damage to that enemy and stun it. 8 damage, and a stun is wild. Even more wild that it's only 2 resources. Yeah, you gotta find a Bamf and get it into play and get it on the villain or whatever, but that's easy. 8 damage, 2 resources, and a stun! Then we get 2 copies of Scout Ahead, a 1-cost superpower thwart event. As a hero action, remove 3 threat from a scheme. Then you can discard a copy of Bamf from your hand to remove 3 threat from another scheme. Yeah, he's not great on thwart. I mean, 1 resource for 3 threat is actually pretty good. 1 resource for 6 threat is obviously amazing, but then you gotta get rid of a Bamf, and that means that you have to have 2 different schemes in play that each have a bit of threat on it, because it has to be a different scheme. It can't be 1 for 6 on the main scheme, unfortunately. But it's good. It's fine. It's good. A 0-cost event is next. Port Away. It has the superpower trait, and it's an anytime action. Discard a copy of Bamf from your hand to change forms and ready your identity. I really wish this was more than a one-off, because it's awesome. You attack or whatever, use this to flip down to alter ego and ready, use your basic recover. If your chapel is out, you get to draw a card. Then you flip back up to hero and avoid taking a big scheme. Last up in his kit is 2 copies of Tally Ho, a 1-cost defensive superpower. As a hero response, after Bamf is used to make Nightcrawler the defender of an attack, return that copy of Bamf to your hand rather than discarding it, and deal the attacking enemy 3 damage. Ooh, that's real nice. You defend without exhausting, you do a bit of damage back, and you get that Bamf into your hand so you can put it right back on that enemy and defend without exhausting again? I like it. The bad stuff. Kurt's obligation is Crisis of Faith. It lets you flip down to alter ego, then you either exhaust as Kurt to remove it from the game, or discard each attack and defense event in your hand to discard it. That one's pretty brutal. Maybe you draw it early game and you've got supports and upgrades and allies in your hand that you haven't gotten out yet, but late game, when hopefully you're all set up with all that stuff in play, that's all attack and defend, that's going to be most of your hand. His nemesis minion is sort of Dad Azazel, who has the Elite and Neophim traits. He only has 3 hit points, but he does 2 scheme and 3 attack, and that attack has stupid quick strike. He cannot have upgrades attached, and if he's drawn as a boost, he goes to Kurt as an encounter card. Stupid quick strike. And stupid not being able to put Bamf on him. And stupid... I don't know, he's stupid. Brimstone Dimension is Azazel's side scheme. It comes into play with 5 threat, has the hazard icon, and when it's defeated, the identity who defeats it finds Azazel and deals him to themselves as an encounter card. Well, that's all kinds of awful. So there's 2 kind of ways that this might play out. Either you defeat Azazel first, and then you defeat the side scheme, bringing Azazel back out, re-engaging with you, and getting to do his stupid quick strike again. Or you defeat the side scheme while he's still in play, in which case he'll just sort of re-engage with you and get to do his stupid quick strike again. Important to note, though, if you've done some damage to Azazel, or if you've gotten a stun or confuse out on him, those will persist through this sort of refreshing of his ability to punch you in the face. 1 copy of Azazel's Sword is next. It's a weapon attachment that goes on Azazel if he's out, or the villain if he's not. It gives Azazel, or the villain, +1 to their attack and gives those attacks piercing. And after they make an attack, discard a random card from your hand. But then at least you also get to discard this. The piercing part isn't actually all that bad for Kurt. It's not like he's laying down tufts everywhere, but discarding a random card, that sure sucks. And last is 2 copies of Brimstone Strike, a treachery. When it's revealed, find Azazel and put him into play. If you're in alter ego form, he immediately schemes. And it's not listed, but if you draw him in hero form, you're also going to get immediately attacked because, say it with me now, stupid quick strike. Onto his aspect cards, Nightcrawler came with a protection deck. Up first is sort of Sister Rogue, as played by Anna Marie. She's a 4-cost ally with 3 hit points and the X-Men trait. She does 2s in each stat, and as an action, deal 1 damage to a friendly character other than Rogue. Until the end of the round, Rogue gains each of that character's traits, and adds that character's printed thwart and attack to her own. Yes, that cost is pretty rough, but getting her stats up to, if you're playing her with Nightcrawler and you do the damage to Nightcrawler to get her stats, his stats added to her, she's going to be thwarting at a 4. Do that. Next up is North Star in the style of Jean-Paul Beaubier. He's a 3-cost ally with 3 hit points and the X-Men trait. He does 1 thwart and 2 attack, and as an interrupt, when a boost card is turned face up during an attack, deal 1 damage to North Star to cancel all boost icons on that card. Great ability and great for characters that know they're going to be taking calculated hits. If you're not putting allies down just to take abuse for you, you know you want to get hit because, say, you're doing retaliate back and hey, maybe your defend is a 4. This is great to say the attack is already coming in at a 4 and I know I can handle that. Why don't we turn off the boost cards? Let's make sure it's only 4 and it's not secretly 7. Then we get 3 copies of a 1-cost upgrade, Change of Fortune. Play under any identity, max 1 per identity. As a response, after you defeat an enemy in the villain phase, exhaust this card and draw 2 cards. So Nightcrawler already gets 1 retaliate with his cutlasses. If you put out a Dauntless and an electrostatic armor, you're doing 3. Tally-ho brings the whole thing up to 6. Top it off with Flow Like Water, because Tally-ho is an defense event. That's 7 damage back when you get attacked. It's safe to say you'll probably be defeating some enemies in the villain phase. This card's awesome. And it fits so nicely into that style of protection that I personally love playing, where the villain just beats themselves to death on your fists. So good. Up next is 3 copies of Under Control, a 0-cost upgrade with the Tactic trait. Attached to a minion, max 1 per minion. After a hero defends against the attached minion's attack and takes no damage, deal 4 damage to that minion. I mean, you know you're going to be able to defend several times because of BAMF not making you exhaust. If you can defend then with your 4 defense and not take any damage, you just get to do 4 back to a minion. Not Azazel. Can't put this on Azazel, but most of the rest of them, they attack you and you do 4 damage, plus you retaliate. And if you have Dauntless and all that stuff out, which you probably don't need to do the whole retaliate suite and this, but why not? Do it. Then there's 3 copies of Come Get Me Bub, another 0-cost tactic. This one is an event. As a hero action, discard cards from the encounter deck until you discard a minion. Put that minion into play engaged with you, then heal 3 damage from your hero and give it a tough status. I like the card. I like the cost. I like what it does. It's kind of a protection looking for trouble, kind of, but I don't like the name. Come Get Me Bub. I don't know. It doesn't flow. I don't like it. Riposte is next. We get 3 copies of this 1-cost defense event. As an interrupt, when you defend against an attack, you get +2 to your defense. If you take no damage from that attack, deal 3 damage to the attacking enemy. Well, that's a lot of fun. I like that a lot. You boost your defense up to 6 or 7 with Nightcrawler. If you put Armored Vest out, your regular defend is a 5. This gets you up to 7 and then does damage if you don't take damage. 3 copies of this, 3 copies of Hard to Ignore. What more could a boy need? Next up is 1 copy of Astonishing X-Men, a 1-cost player side scheme. It comes into play with 5 threat on it. It has victory 0, and while it's out, it gets a response. After an X-Men character defends against an enemy attack and takes no damage, remove 1 threat from this scheme. Then, when it's defeated, stun and confuse each enemy in play. And it's not a forced response. You can choose to leave a threat on there until you want to take it off, and then stun and confuse several minions and the villain? Heck yes. That's amazing. Plus, player side schemes in general help thin your deck. Whether you defeat it or not, it's never coming back into your deck, so that gets you more of an opportunity to draw Tally-ho. Our first basic card is Gambit, as played by Remy LeBeau. He's a 3-cost ally with 3 hit points and the Thief and X-Men traits. When he comes into play, look at the top 3 cards of the encounter deck and tuck one of them under Gambit so that just the boost field is visible. Gambit's attack and thwart are the number of boost icons on that card. So with 1 fell swoop, you're getting an ally, getting rid of a nasty encounter card, and taking a look at what the next 2 encounter cards are, which is going to be a boost and then your encounter card. That's a very good swoop. Then we get an aggression card. 3 copies of Combine Forces, a 1-cost event with the Alliance keyword. As a hero action, exhaust an X-Force character and an X-Men character to defeat a non-elite minion. So it's got the Alliance keyword, but it only costs 1, so other identities can help pay 1. In solo, I still don't like it. You still have to have allies that are, if you're X-Men, you have to have allies that are all X-Force so that you hope to have one in play when you draw this card and have a non-elite minion in play that you need to get rid of, that you can't just attack to get rid of. That's a whole lot of ifs. That's a whole lot of things that have to come together to make this card useful in solo. On the other hand, if you are playing multi-handed multiplayer and you have one X-Men centric hero and one X-Force centric hero, and they have minions that maybe you exhaust and you're not using your hero to do this, then maybe it's good. There are actually quite a few pretty nasty minions that are not elite. There's weirdly kind of a few Nemesis minions that aren't elite that this would be really nice to just get off the board. And last is 3 copies of a Justice card, Gunboat Diplomacy. It's another 1-cost event with the Alliance keyword, and it's both an attack and thwart event. As a hero action, exhaust an X-Force character and an X-Men character to remove threat from among schemes in play equal to the character's combined thwart, and deal damage to enemies in play equal to the combined attack. This one is maybe a bit more useful in true solo if you are going to try and pull it off, and you have the allies and do all of that stuff. Having at least an enemy and having at least a scheme with threat on it is much more likely than having a minion that you need to get rid of that doesn't have elite, blah, 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 blah. So this card could work in true solo. You still really got to play with your ally situation. So I still don't really like it, but you could. And again, in multi-handed or multiplayer, it's great. There's no limit there. It's up to all of the enemies in play, up to all of the schemes in play. That's fantastic. Growing up, Nightcrawler was always my favorite comic book character. I wasn't even super into comic books in those days, but I had, just a stack of Excalibur comics because of this guy. So this was the first release where I actually felt a little bit nervous. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that, but I did. Like, what if I didn't like Nightcrawler? I don't care if I don't like Jubilee or I don't like Spider-Ham. You put them in a box, you never take them out again. But to not like Nightcrawler would be a bummer. And luckily, we're good. Bummer-free zone over here because Nightcrawler is awesome. Especially in protection, especially with this, the style of letting the enemy attack you to their peril. He's so good for that. Bopping around and defending against this guy and defending against that guy and never having to exhaust. So good. It's so satisfying. He's so much fun to play. And that's largely because Bamf is so much fun. Being able to defend without exhausting, being able to do 8 damage and a stun for 2 resources, or take 3 threat off of 2 different schemes. That's great. But you do only get 3 copies, so keeping track of where they are they in your deck, are they in your discard pile, do you need to flip down to Alter Ego to get another one out of your deck to put it into play? Is it worth going down to Alter Ego for a Bamf when you know you've got 2 more in your discard pile, or whatever? You also want to be very aware of where they are before you have to reset your deck. If you're about to draw your last card, you might want to have a Bamf already in play or in your hand so that when you do that, they're not all buried in your deck, because then you will have to go down to Alter Ego to pull one back out, or the whole machine comes to a grinding halt. You can't do anything if you don't have your Bamfs. Remember that the resource that your tail generates does not satisfy your hero ability to pay a resource to bring Bamf back out of your discard pile. That resource has to come from somewhere else. Hopefully not your hand, because that's going to limit you quite a lot. So bring along an X-Jet. Then you're going to get a free wild resource to pay specifically to make sure you always have a Bamf in hand. And try to get your cutlasses and to a lesser extent your tail out in play as quickly as possible. The cutlasses boost your attack, they boost your defense, they give you retaliate. They're so good. Superpower training will help you find your cutlass and get it into play, or your tail if you've already found cutlasses somewhere else. One or the other. The resource your tail generates is Wild, which is perfect for cards like Sidestep to do a little bit of damage back, or Jump Flip to do a little threat mitigation back. Getting an armored vest on him brings his basic defense to a 5. If you go through specialized training and put a defense specialist on him, you're getting him up to a 6. If you bring Sync along as one of your allies, you can defend at a 7. Probably don't need to, but you could. Aggression has some fun cards for him. He has the cutlasses that don't do anything else. They sit there and they are static and they're awesome, but they don't like exhaust to do something, so you can bring along Fusillade or Mean Swing so that you can exhaust them to do something. And he has that third restricted keyword holder because of his tail. So you could bring along Yarmnyorn, you could bring along Godslayer, which actually might be a little bit better because he doesn't have just floating fist resources to feed Yarmnyorn. And Nightcrawler joins the pretty short list of characters who want to bring along Take That. You put Bamf out, and then you do 7 damage with Take That? Yeah. And you can use Lock and Load to go searching for your cutlasses so superpower training can focus on finding your tail. Alright, that's all I got for Nightcrawler. Now get off my lawn. I still can't believe you gotta find your tail. The Grouchy Nerd.